Hi, I've been studying languages as a hobby for a while now, so I thought I'd do a little video to give my experiences on Michel Thomas, Paul Noble and the Pimsleur audio language courses. Approaches first. First with Pimsleur, its approach is very much based on the idea that children don't need explanations to learn their native language. They just pick it up from repeated exposure in different contexts. And I mean, this is true, but you know, the fact remains we're not children. And I think the approach from Michel Thomas and Paul Noble, where they give you explanations of the language first, is useful, and it sort of sets the contexts and allows you to look at the examples given just with a bit more understanding, being a little less puzzled as these things are introduced. One of the other key aspects is how Pimsleur has been based on some serious scientific study into how we retain information and learn things. And so while all of them use the idea that you should start with a simplified grammar, a small vocabulary, that they should be introduced and then repeated at intervals, the Pimsleur approach is far more structured than the other two, and in my experience is far more effective at actually getting you to remember things. You remember things with Michel Thomas and Paul Noble as well, but maybe you have to go a couple of times through the course before it all sticks. Having said that, Paul Noble and Michel Thomas help you retain things far more than, say, my traditional experience was at school, or with many of the other courses. So they're all good, but Pimsleur is especially good at helping you retain things. Because of the explanation side of things with Michel Thomas and Paul Noble, it allows them also to give you some shortcuts to learning the language, which is very useful. With the Latin and Germanic languages, there's a huge amount of commonality between English and those languages, and Michel Thomas and Paul Noble point out the common vocabulary between the two that can be accessed with some simple rules. So you get thousands of words of vocabulary instantly without having to do one single minute of study. So for example, words ending in tion, conception, for instance, there's another word meaning exactly the same thing, just pronounced differently in Spanish and in French and so forth. Conception, for example, very simple. You can take the word, take the tion off the end, and you can make a verb out of it with so many of these verbs. So it's a very, very powerful tool, and something which it's worth doing those courses just for that, to be honest, that little bit of wisdom. Okay, let's move on to language, structure and grammar. All of the methods downplay formal learning of grammar rules in the way that you would have done at school. So start off with simple stuff, as I said, such as just learning the language from first and second person, I and you and so forth, with a very simple set of vocabulary. Pimsleur relies almost exclusively on you learning the grammar by example and just giving you increasingly complex examples, providing virtually no explanation. Michel Thomas and Paul Noble will start each of the lessons by explaining simple patterns, and then you get into the examples in the same way that Pimsleur does. Pimsleur, by contrast, you'll start with a conversation. You'll understand very little of it, and then you go into just question and response modes, or repeat and response modes, and eventually you sort of pick up what's going on as far as the structure is concerned. The Michel Thomas classes differ also because you are a participant in a lesson with two other students, whereas both Paul Noble and Pimsleur just have an instructor, and they also have a native speaker there to help with the pronunciations. Vocabulary. Michel Thomas and Paul Noble both use a very restricted set of vocabulary in the course. With the Latin and Germanic languages, all that's made up for with some simple rules pointing out how you can convert directly from English into the target language. But they don't really cover a large number of scenarios, and the scenarios that are covered are pretty incomplete when it comes to vocabulary. So with both Michel Thomas and Paul Noble, you really can't expect to deliver yourself just even as a casual tourist and be able to handle yourself in all situations with the vocabulary given in the course, and you really do have to augment courses with other material. Now, I mean, that's not as bad as it sounds. There's lots out there on YouTube. There's online dictionaries, there are flashcard and interactive learning tools, much of which is free, foreign language news sites. And there's a lot there that you can use to increase your vocabulary over time. As I said, Pimsleur, more vocabulary is built into the lessons, and because of its ability to help you to memorize the vocabulary that they give you, you'll find that at the end of the Pimsleur course, you'll certainly have a lot more vocabulary memorized, and the vocabulary will be far more complete, and you really probably can take yourself off on your holiday and be confident that you'll be able to get by without anything additional. But obviously, if you're serious about learning the language as opposed to just pottering around as a tourist, you will need to augment even with the Pimsleur course. One thing that they're all guilty of is not complicating things. Each of the courses will find one way of expressing a certain topic or a certain word for something, and they'll tend to stick with it even if there are lots of other ways of saying things that are in common use. So it's good for keeping it simple in terms of when you want to speak to someone. Maybe a little bit of a problem the other way around, because the course may not have even told you that these other ways of expressing the same thing exist. Pronunciation. Both Pimsleur and Paul Noble have an English-speaking instructor and a native speaker to ensure that you get the correct pronunciation. Michel Thomas, by contrast, is quite a mixture. For languages that Michel Thomas is proficient in, he is both the instructor and your reference for pronunciation. He's got a very thick accent himself for English. It sounds German to me, but I understand he's French, so somewhere between the two. But certainly I understand that his Spanish and Italian accent are appalling. Strangely enough, though, I found that even for the languages where his accent was appalling, what he does better than either of the others is he manages to convey what's important in terms of accent and the stress on words in order to be understood. So for Spanish, for instance, if you place the stress in one place and you place it in another, you'll change the tense. So as Michel Thomas says, to be in the present tense, you need to stress that particular syllable. If you're in the present tense, you've changed the meaning completely. So you are told these things in the other courses, but Michel Thomas really drums it into you. So after a Michel Thomas course, you probably would go to Spain and the Spanish people would laugh at your accent because you sound ridiculous, because you're exaggerating everything. Quiero, and so forth. But on the other hand, they'll understand you. So, as opposed to what you may have ended up with is, having a lot of people going, "What? I'm not sure what you said," because you're in effect mumbling things in their language. So, given that most people's concern when they start a language is to be understood, it's not all a bad thing, and I wouldn't discount Michel Thomas just because his accent's atrocious. It's about communication, and he manages to get you to learn to communicate. Comprehension. Now, I'm a fan of Michel Thomas and Paul Noble, big fan, but with respect to comprehension, they both fail to deliver miserably. Essentially, you learn to express yourself, you learn to be able to say what you want to say, but neither of them stress being able to listen to a native speaker speaking at a normal pace. And if you expect to be able to just simply do either the Michel Thomas course or the Paul Noble course and then go on holiday and be able to understand what people are saying to you, unless you butt in at the beginning of every conversation and say, I'm English, I don't speak Spanish very well, can you speak slowly? Then you're going to end up with a very puzzled expression on your face all the time. And Pimsleur, by contrast, is very good. You start every lesson with somebody rabbiting on some sentence. You generally don't understand anything to start with, but obviously if you try and understand, then as the lessons progress, your ear becomes gradually more acclimatized to the sound and the rhythm of the language, and you'll find yourself understanding more and more. But having said that, there are lots and lots of resources out there which can allow you to get your ear in. So again, it's not a showstopper that the courses that in themselves don't give you the comprehension you need, but you'll really need to go elsewhere and make an effort to listen to natural language from some other source, and there are lots of them. Okay, revision. What do you want from a revision tool? Essentially, you want something that's going to allow you to crack through the topics you've covered, but a lot faster. The assumption being that it'll take you less long to learn something. If you need to be reminded of something because you've forgotten, it'll take you less time to get it back into your head and remember again. And really, all of these methodologies fall down. Pimsleur, its pace is very, very slow. Now, that's good for the memorization. It's good because it has long pauses that allow you to think before you start again. But when you're revising, it just can take forever to get through the whole course again. Many, many hours of course to get through. Each of the lessons, rather, cover stuff that have taken place in previous lessons. So you can go through, you can pick out the later lessons in a set and use those as revision. But Paul Noble has a specific revision lesson, which is a great idea. However, its execution is appalling. He basically just misses stuff out, which I find very annoying. Michel Thomas, it's good because the lessons crack on at a pace. So in one sense, it's better to revise using Michel Thomas, but the real problem is Michel Thomas uses real students, because with Michel Thomas, you are a third student amongst 3 students, and they just recorded the lesson. And as you'd expect, students learning the language don't understand things, they're slow at responding, they make mistakes, they ask questions, they're having to be corrected by the teacher. And that's great as a learning tool, because you pick up things that maybe you wouldn't have realized from just the formal lesson. But when it comes to revision, you know more this time, and yet you're having to wade through the same idiot questions, the same pregnant pauses, the same mistakes, the same and so forth. And it just the more you revise from the tape, the more irritating it gets. I've been meaning to cut my own revision tape from Michel Thomas so I could use him, but just cut out all the not so good bits. But I've never got around to it, so maybe that tells you of how practical that's going to be. As far as confidence is concerned, now here I believe that Michel Thomas and Paul Noble have the edge. What do I mean by confidence? I mean, how quickly does the course get you to believe that you are really going to be able to speak this language? How quickly will it get you to believe that it's worth trying to say something because you'll probably be right, as opposed to being afraid to speak and be laughed at by someone? However, I can't be absolutely sure about this because I have come later to Pimsleur, so maybe I have a different view if it's the other way around. But if you look at the reviews of other people, it's a common view. An example would be my daughter, who was learning Portuguese, and she was happy with her progress. But I introduced her to the Michel Thomas Portuguese language course, and she came back with the comments, "Wow, I'm amazed. It's so easy to learn Portuguese, and I hadn't realised Portuguese was such an easy language to learn," and so forth. So I think it really does have the edge. Pace and pausing. Paul Noble and Pimsleur give you pauses between the questions and response, so you have time to think about this, think about things before you respond. Whereas Michel Thomas basically cracks on at a pace. There's no pauses. You have to actually use your device to pause the lesson, think about, give yourself as much thinking time as you want, and then move on. If you were driving a car And when you're learning, that could be seen as a real positive thing because you don't have to fiddle around with your earpiece or pause button or whatever. My personal experience is that even with Pimsleur and Paul Noble, I end up using the pause button anyway, simply because there are some times when I need more than the allocated thinking time, especially in driving a car. There are distractions around. I might be thinking about something else and need to pause in order not to crash into the cyclist by the side of the road or something. So these pauses that are built into the lessons just become an irritation, because when I start again, I then have to wait whatever number of seconds before I actually get the response. So for me, it's a waste of time. Range of languages and levels. By far, Pimsleur has the largest number of languages available to it. And also it has the highest level of expertise available in languages. Not for all languages. Some of the languages you only have one level available, but for the popular languages you might have 5 different levels of expertise available. Is expertise the right word? But levels of competency available to you. I've not experienced the higher levels, but certainly I think the implication is that Pimsleur can really take you up to advanced intermediate level, as it were. However they're described, the Michel Thomas and Paul Noble courses really are beginners courses. Michel Thomas, the way they divide up their courses is hugely confusing. You've got foundation courses, you've got a set of courses called Total, something like Total Mandarin. You've got a set of courses called Perfect Mandarin. You've got some CDs in there that are a vocabulary lesson, and sometimes they split it off into a separate vocabulary course. But in the end, forget the foundation course, it's just the first 2 lessons of the Total course. The Total course has nothing to do with total anything, it's beginners essentially. The Perfect covers all of what you do in the Total course, usually at a much faster pace and with additional stuff tacked on. So I'd say even just the splitting up of each of these things, each of them into separate courses is a marketing thing rather than actually a logical separation between the courses themselves. But having said that, the Perfect language course will be a little bit more advanced than the Total course. Price and media, you can buy these courses on CD, or you can have them available for download in digital format. Paul Noble is excellent value, whichever format you go for, and certainly if you're learning a language on a budget, I'd recommend Paul Noble. You get a lot of course for your buck. Pimsleur, all the courses are available on both CD and for download. They are more expensive. The courses are very slow, so obviously you think you might be paying a certain amount for a lesson or 5 lessons. Well, there's a lot less in 5 lessons of Pimsleur than there is in 5 lessons of Michel Thomas. In my opinion, the most economical way to learn a language actually is to buy the CD. Not because it's cheaper particularly than buying the online lessons, but because when you buy the CD, you can copy the lessons to your own device and then resell the CDs on eBay, and you recoup 60-70% of the cost of the lesson. Do watch out. You get a new device, a new laptop, and you want to transfer your stuff. The real problem of having cut them from CD is that if you lose the media file for whatever reason, you've got to repurchase. I've been caught out a few times with that. Both Paul Noble and Pimsleur allow you to download any number of devices and to copy those files onto different devices and so forth. Michel Thomas imposes digital rights restrictions. That manifests itself in a couple of ways. One, if you get a new laptop and you think to copy them across to your new device, they won't run because they're restricted to your single device. However, it's not that bad. You just have to go to the website if you bought them from Audible, probably the only one I can really talk to properly, and enable your device. Maybe a bigger problem is if you wanted to convert the Michel Thomas files into MP3 format. You're only allowed to copy it to CD or convert it to another format once only. But you can get around that because with Audible you can simply download the file again and you'll be able to convert that other copy of the file. And I prefer the download simply because I can trash my laptop, I can lose my backups, etc. I can just go back to the Audible site and download the files to my device. So my recommendation, you probably sussed it by now, I'd recommend you start with Michel Thomas, and if money is no object, carry on with Pimsleur after the event, and also augment your learning with all the masses of free resource out there. Again, recommend flashcard tools such as EYKI. I'd recommend online interactive tools such as Duolingo, it's an online site for the Western European languages. Loads of YouTube videos, obviously. Most courses give you some lessons free, so you just hunt around, you'll find them. For a lot of languages, the broadcasting companies in those countries provide free resource. Our BBC has lots of language courses which are completely free. So hunt around and you'll find lots of resources there. If you're on a budget, or you're not sure whether you actually want to start the course or whether you can be interested in the language, Paul Noble's great value for money. And you can start with Paul Noble, for instance, and then go to, say, the perfect language course for Michel Thomas, and then on to Pimsleur, etc. if you so wish. Little warning for those of you wanting to learn Italian. I like Michel Thomas, but do not buy Michel Thomas's Italian course. His accent is atrocious, but it's more the production. Somewhere along the line, somebody has just really cocked up with the production. He'll start talking about a particular tense with absolutely no introduction. The lesson just flips into a new tense. You're lost, thinking, what the hell? What's going on? I don't understand. Until you manage to suss it out by yourself. So dreadful. And also the students are so irritating on that, even more so than normal. Huge long pregnant pauses and stupid questionings, and so that'd be my advice as far as that was concerned. But other than that, Michel Thomas is great. Well, I hope you found this little summary useful. I'll say goodbye.